Hello, everybody. I wanted to go through and talk a little bit about this first module. Um, Module 1 is all about just kind of an intro to intro. And so let's go through this just a little bit. I might skip through some things just because it's not super important for us to talk about, but I'll go through some important things that I think that you guys will need to hold on to and remember. So the birth of psychology, or how psychology came about, is you could argue that it's been since the beginning of time, but we look at Aristotle just because he was one of the philosophers that was really trying to figure out how the mind and the body work. Are they separate? Are they different? Are they combined? Are they together? So, he was really trying to guess what is the mind, where is the mind, and how does it work? Philosophers, really throughout time, we're always trying to figure out humans and what makes us behave a certain way, and what guides us and directs us. And so really, throughout history, people have always questioned people's motives and so on. So psychology just, it was kind of interesting the way it came about. Nobody sat down and said, I'm going to study psychology. It just blended. It really came about from philosophy and from biology, trying to figure out the human. When we look back in time, we can pinpoint maybe what we would call the first psychological experiment. And this was conducted by Wilhelm Wundt in 1879 in Germany. And again, he didn't say, I'm going to conduct a psychological experiment. But looking at what he did, we can say, yeah, that's pretty much psychological. So what he did was he wanted to measure what was happening inside of the mind, what was a mind process. And so he would take a ball and he dropped it, and he wanted the individual to press a button as soon as that person saw the ball hit the table. And so the button measured the time, or like your reaction time. And so he found that humans can react in about 1/10 of a second. So, the ball would hit the table and they'd hit the button, and then the ball would hit the table and they'd hit the button. And it measured about 1/10 of a second. Then Wilhelm decided, okay, he's like, okay, you guys are really good. You're really fast. Now I want to measure your awareness. And so he asked them to, watch the ball fall and hit the table. He's like, but I want you to hit the button when you're aware that the ball hit the table. And so this is a little bit different than just a split reaction, right? It's like it hit, bam, I hit the button. The ball hit, bam, I hit the button. Now he's asking them to, okay, the ball hit, oh, I'm aware. And so I hit the button. The ball hit, yes, I'm aware, and hit the button. It's so minute, and it's so, it really is kind of the same thing, but I guess you can see that it is a little bit different. So instead of just a mere reaction, he was trying to measure the awareness of it. And he found that the time pretty much doubled, right? When you had to make that extra thought of, I'm aware that it hit. We could argue that this is not the best study, but it was an attempt, right? And he was trying to see, is there a second stage or a second place inside of our brain where awareness is located maybe in a different section compared to just a mere reaction. So Wilhelm Wundt, he was important for that study. And we would say that he was definitely a part of this group. When psychology first started out, we had what we call structuralism and then something called functionalism. So structuralism was about using inside thought processes or mental awareness, what we might call introspection, where you talk about what's on the inside, what's happening inside of your mind. And that the brain is structured in that way, that there are different sensations, there's elements of experience, there's awareness, and so on. Okay. The second side of that would be, or the other side, the other school of thought would be functionalism, that that all of your psychological processes, everything that happens inside of your brain happens for a reason, that there's a function for that process. Okay, and it's a little bit different than structuralism, but you know, I guess not much now that we look back on it. You don't have to necessarily know all of these names, but William James was important. He was the one that wrote the first psychological textbook, and so that's cool. And he mentored Mary Calkins. She was the first female president of the APA, the American Psychological Association. And she studied under William James at Harvard. However, she was not granted a PhD because she was female. And then we have Margaret Washburn. She was the second female president of the APA, and she wrote the book called The Animal Mind, which is pretty interesting. It's pretty thick, it's pretty dense, but it's a good book. And she was actually the first female that was granted a psychology PhD. All right. So this is what we could kind of call the timeline of psychology. Here it says it's the shifting definitions of psychology. And really, I guess we could say it's the shifting definitions of psychology because throughout time, psychology tended to focus on different aspects. So way back in the, late 1800s or early 1900s, we would say psychology was defined by mental life, right? We have Wilhelm Wundt here, which was, all that introspection, what was happening on the inside of your mind. You would have Freud right here, where he's talking about, the unconscious and all of the thoughts that are inside of the mind. So we say it was a science of mental life during this time. Then it was about the 1920s that you had Watson come around and say, for psychology to be taken serious as a serious science, we can't be talking about the stuff that's happening inside of the mind because I can't see it. You can't measure it. And he said that psychology needed to be taken seriously. And so we needed to be able to measure and observe what's happening. And so he really kickstarted the whole idea that psychology was the scientific study of observable behavior, because behavior you can see, behavior you can measure. It was a rather cold time, I guess you could say, of psychology, because they didn't really care about the internal processes. They didn't care about your mind, your emotions, your intentions, your motivations. They just cared about behavior. Then in the 60s, you had, peace, love, drugs, and, rock and roll. And so that greatly influenced psychology as well. And you had what we call the humanistic perspective, where they went from that very cold, just behavior kind of side of things back to, self-esteem and how do you feel about yourself, and were you loved enough, were you hugged enough as a child, and tell me about your motivations and your ambitions. And so it was really kind of brought psychology back around, really into even more of a more positive psychology. So cognitive psychologists, back to the thought process, the emotions, the communication, knowledge, and so on. So today, really, we say it's all of them, right? We can't ignore behavior. We can't ignore the mental processes. So we say that psychology now is the science of behavior and mental processes. That's how we would define it today. I'm not going to talk about these Skinner and Watson, because I promise you we will get to them later, okay, throughout the semester. So let's not do this right now. Here's Freud. We got Maslow and Rogers, but I promise you we'll talk about them later. Nature nurture question, we really don't say that it's one or the other anymore. We say that it's both. It's nature and nurture. The nature side of things would be the biology, your inborn chemicals, hormones, brain structures, and it's just who you are from the get-go. The nurture side of things is your experiences. It's your family, it's your school, it's your friends, and it's all of society that helps shape who you are. So we no longer say that it's one or the other. We say that it's really both, right? Because we can't take out the human nature that's born inside, and we certainly can't take out your experiences either. So nowadays we say nurture works with what nature endows. Knowing that it's biology and social influences, but it's also the individual and how they think and how they react, and what is their emotion and their motivation. It's really everything combined that causes us to behave a certain way, causes us to think a certain way. So when we go through this class, I'm going to ask you, or you'll see several times, that we talk about the biopsychosocial level of analysis. And what we mean is you can take any behavior or mental process and put it right here and run it through our biopsychosocial level of analysis. So if we wanted to look at, say, something like depression, right? Or if we wanted to look at what causes intelligence, or why do certain people enjoy soccer and others don't? Why are some people really shy? Why are some people super talkative? We would want to look at all the aspects, right? Is there a certain biological aspect for depression? Is it hormonal? Is it your brain mechanisms having low levels of serotonin? Is there a genetic component to depression? Okay, psychological, right? Did this person just kind of learn to be that way? Is this their natural emotional response? Their cognitive processes, what are they telling themselves? Do they have a really horrible negative self-talk that could be influencing the depression? Our social influences, right? Are our friends or school, bullies, things like that. Is that causing the depression? Is it your family expectations or society? Do you feel that you can't live up to what your family is expecting of you, or what society expects of you? Here we have again peer influences, models, even just the media, what's going on in the world, is that causing the depression? So if we were going to look at depression in a person, we would really be doing that person a disservice if we ignored any aspect of this, right? If I only focused on, well, that's because that's what they're telling themselves and that's just their response. Well, what if I'm missing that they need some serotonin? Or what if I'm missing the fact that they're being bullied? So you can see here that it's just a more complete picture if we look through all of these lenses. I'm not going to talk about all of these because you can, well, I'm not going to talk about all the examples. You can read those, but these are our main 6 perspectives that we have in psychology. We have the cognitive perspective where they focus on thinking, sociocultural, which makes sense, right? Behavioral genetics, neuroscience, what's happening in the brain. The psychodynamic is the Freudian influence. Behaviorist is the Watson and Skinner, right? All about behavior. And then we have the evolutionary perspective. I kind of think of the evolutionary perspective as a very primal drive. You know, like what would lions do out in the Sahara? How would gorillas behave? And that can sometimes, you know, put it in the perspective of the evolutionary lens. Going to go through that. This is just different types of research. So psychology, you can go into research, or psychology, you can go into an applied scenario where you're actually a psychologist or a counselor. Most of them kind of overlap the research lens to the applied side, but not always. But lots of different research going on at all kinds of universities across the world. Applied, you can be a clinical psychologist, you can be a counselor. Educational psychology is within the education department. Industrial organizational, this is where psychology and business meet. And then community psychology, kind of trying to understand, you know, what's happening in the community. Why do we have, you know, perhaps an outbreak of diabetes, you know, here in El Paso? What can we do to get people to walk and take care of themselves and eat better? Main difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor. It's either a medical doctor with an MD or a doctor of osteopathy. Both of them have gone to medical school, and a psychiatrist has full prescribing rights. You know, they usually function in a hospital. They're seeing the sickest of the sick individuals. A psychologist has a PhD. They have an office out in the community, and they work with individuals or families or couples and so on. A psychiatrist could be considered like your specialist, like a cardiologist. A psychologist would be considered maybe like a general practitioner, your family doctor. So a psychiatrist, you couldn't really just walk into a psychiatrist's office. They're going to want you to get referred from a psychologist, or you might meet your psychiatrist in a hospital if you have a psychotic break or something like that. So, you know, and then the psychiatrist might get you on some medication and then have you follow up with the psychologist that you see, you know, maybe on a weekly or monthly basis. This is just a little bit about, you know, psychology. Psychologists know all about learning and memory. So who better would be to tell you how to study and learn information. So this is a psychologist recommendation on the best way to study, not just for this class, but for any class. Okay, so always try and test yourself of material. Try not to focus only on the stuff that you know, and particularly focus on the things that you're not getting correct. And the only way you would know that is if you test yourself. You know, try and put it into your own words. I always tell my students, try and explain something to your sibling or your parent. And then you'll certainly realize the aspects that you understand quite well. And then you'll understand or have a better insight into the parts that maybe you need to study a little bit better if you couldn't explain it. So always try and explain the material or put it into your own words, say it out loud, talk to somebody about it. Do not cram, right? We always say that information that is learned quickly is forgotten quickly. So try and space your studying over multiple days, multiple weeks or months, spread studying out over time. And we obviously always like to feel really good about ourselves, so we overestimate how well we know information. And that's usually because we tend to only focus on the stuff that we know because it makes us feel good. If we focus on the stuff that we don't know, it makes us feel kind of bad about ourselves and we start feeling nervous and so on. But I promise you, that's the stuff you need to pay attention to. So really look over stuff, study the stuff you don't know very well. If you can't explain it, read it again, test yourself and focus on the material that you don't know. This is just giving you ways to study a little bit better. And that is all for that one.